Hello, folks, and welcome to episode 6 of TalkiNindies. I'm Justin Nation, and I'm here to answer your questions. We have somehow made it to 6 weeks in a row with questions and having answers. So this experiment, at least for a select group of people, is working out, which is nice. But we'll see what we can keep if we can keep this up. So this week we're going to continue finishing out the questions submitted by Dusky Azure that we had started last week. The first one, which is sort of a continuation of where we left off last week, saying to turn the idea on its head, which was where we left off with whether AAAs were, not risk takers and whether indies were filling the gap and things like that. So saying to turn this head on its head a bit, which indie developers do you think would make the best AAA games and why? And this was a weird question for me to try to answer because it really pointed to a bigger underlying question that I struggle with, and I think a lot of people struggle with, because it's gotten harder and harder to come up with what the answer to it is. And it's really, what makes something an indie game, or what makes a development team an indie developer. And it used to be a lot easier, and for certain things it still is easy. Like if you take Stardew Valley, or you take Golf Story, what's another infamously single developer project, Pumpkin Jack comes to mind. There's quite a lot of them out there, but it's obvious when you have a single developer who painstakingly created something, the majority of which they produce themselves, that makes it really easy. Obviously, that's an indie game, not even a question. But then you get into small development teams that make things. If we're only talking about a few people, it makes it easier as well. But then you also have, you could, to some degree, up to a certain number of people, almost no matter how many people you have working on something, let's say it's a group of 20 or even a group of 30, when you don't have established credentials, when you don't have a bona fide hit, when your funding is, you're running lean and mean, there are a lot of circumstances that size of development team and things like that aren't necessarily indicators that you're not an indie anymore, because a lot of indie development has to do more with the spirit of what you're doing, I'd say, even than the team doing it. I've asked the question before to myself, or within a larger company that's obviously a AAA company, Electronic Arts, Capcom, etc. Is it possible that they have groups that they may fund, that they may own, but that are working on projects that in all respects, as far as the risks they're taking, the style of play, that kind of thing, that could a AAA publisher actually create indie games? And to a degree, I would argue that is possible. In terms of the spirit that they're created under, in terms of the scale, obviously usually AAA games, the scale is shooting a lot higher, and indie games tend to be more humble, either not necessarily in their runtime, though that is sometimes the case. Roguelikes tend to break that rule, so runtime is much more variable. But I think it's a fair question that really makes this question sort of difficult, because in a way, when you look at a game like Hades, made by now I'm drawing a blank. Hades. They also made Bastion. They also made Transistor. Man, my brain is just not. It's early. I always record this first thing in the morning when I get up. Usually before 5 a.m. on Sunday. So my brain's still not quite firing on all cylinders yet. So apologies to the people who made that and that studio, because my brain is not coming up with a name. But when you look at a game like Hades, or you look at a game like Dead Cells, made by Motion Twin, they're the ones that made it. And Supergiant Games is the ones who made Hades. My God. Or if you look at efforts by now a merged company, so getting further away from being an easy to declare Nindie. You have Thunderful, who is a composite now of Image and Form and of Zoink Games, and there's a third one that I wasn't as familiar with, but I know those are the two main players. So we're getting in all these spaces where it's hard to define. It's hard to say what an indie is. I recently was I got the Pac-Man museum collection and the Pac-Man World repack. Both of those, the first one, the retro museum, in the end, I'm willing to put it out there as indie because it's retro. Like that's been one of my loopholes, that collections and things of that nature, assuming that they weren't super mainline, like the Capcom Fighting Collection, I didn't put that in indies because there's too many. The fact that it has Street Fighter in it at all instantly sort of takes it out of that loop. There's nothing indie about Street Fighter. There are some games in there that are more obscure that would feel more in line with that line of thinking, but you include Street Fighter, you're out. But Pac-Man is as popular as Pac-Man is. I actually considered the museum collection indie to some degree, in my loophole of if it's old enough, if it's retro enough. Its appeal is not really. Its appeal is really to people who are looking for recapturing, earlier days or appreciating, earlier titles. So, because of Pac-Man Museum's, much more retro arcade roots, that felt at least somewhat fair to include. And I'd consider the Pac-Man World repack. It definitely has more of a retro vibe to it, or the Klonoa collection that was re-released. It's a little different. Like it's followed the path to. Part of what I think makes indie games is there's a niche quality to them. They can be really popular and they can break through and have a lot of success, but to me, a piece of the puzzle with indie games is you aren't necessarily shooting for mainstream acceptance. You'd love it if you got it, but you're really shooting to satisfy, a very specific vision that isn't intended necessarily to be, super popular. Stardew Valley feels like it was an homage to, the Harvest Moon and games like that. But with more developed story, characters that were more interesting, etc. It didn't. I guess in a way, all games set out to be super popular, but I don't think it was setting out to be a record-breaking, bank-making kind of game. It was set out to be this very specific vision, and the fact that it found so much success is great. And a credit to the developer, but it didn't. I think it's still obviously an indie game because what it is and the experience it gives you. It's not a mainstream experience. It's not a safe. I checked all the stuff off on the list that's going to make a mainstream popular game. It didn't do any of that. It just he made a very high quality game that a lot of people connected with, and it became a phenomenon. So, or a great example is a very oddball game that somehow got into the cultural zeitgeist is a Untitled Goose Game. obviously a super a super strange. I mean, you're playing. It's an asshole simulator. You're being just the biggest asshole of a goose that you possibly could, and it's fun and it's weird, and and it's great. I mean, who doesn't want to? For once in I don't think I ever contemplate in life saying, what's the worst possible thing I could do here, and try to get away with it, and yet it's fun in that context. So rather than answer the question, because when you say which indie developers could tackle AAA, well, Supergiant Games I think definitely could. Motion Twin I definitely think could. I mean, they're effectively already making AAA games, but they're making indie games that happen to be AAA in their quality and in what they sort of the audience that they've attracted. So it's a weird non-answer, which tends to be what I do anyway. But so I'm not answering your question the way you thought, but I think it is. I think what is underlying your question is what makes games indie games, what makes games AAA games, and I really think that the lines have blurred to the point that it's getting harder and harder to answer questions that are oriented with that. So condensing it all, I think really indie games, it's about, right, obviously funding comes into play at some point, and risk certainly comes into play, but I think it really is that indie games as a whole, rather than focusing on trying to make something that everybody likes, which really seems to be the way AAA games are conceived and made. It's, we know what's successful. We're going down the focus group path, and we're going to try to get something that's going to make 80% of these people all smile, that are completely in different directions. We're going to try to satisfy as much as possible in one shot in order to find success. Indie games are very much the opposite. We have a vision that is very specific, that isn't necessarily intended to make everybody happy, but it's what we want to build, and we want to make something unique, and we want to do something a bit more daring. So maybe that's part of it. There's a artistic bent to it. It's painting abstract art when the world wants mainstream kind of stuff. Well, you could do stuff that that the rubes will pay reproductions or copies of popular paintings that that people will go, I'll spend $30 on that. Or do you just do your own thing, and maybe you don't find an audience, maybe you do. Maybe there's a piece of that in the AAA versus indie scope. You're not looking for the sure thing. You're looking for expressing yourself and doing something unique, and you're hoping certainly to find success, but success isn't something you're willing to compromise your vision for either. I don't know. This is always interesting because I tend to sort of make mental notes as I look at these. I try to actually look at the questions very little, and I try not to overthink anything before I talk, because I think it makes for more interesting stream of consciousness discoveries. I don't know if everybody likes to listen to that, but that's my style. So I'm very indie with how I approach this, because I have a very artistic style in mind of accomplishing my goal of reaching a niche audience with a stream of consciousness thought process, rather than pre-thought out, very carefully conceived answers to all questions. So yes, this is indie a podcast, or it's not a podcast, but as indie a thing as you're going to get to listen to, which is why it will probably never be popular. But moving on to the next question. It's what are your top underrated indie titles, and why do you think they went under the radar? Dang, this is so tough. I have regularly tried to, I've regularly thought about making a top list that really would be the top 100, underappreciated, or the top 100 indie games that nobody's ever heard of, type of thing. But what's difficult for me is a lot of the games I'd put on that list. While I think that they're not appreciated or they're not as known as they should be, a lot of them I'm banging the drum about on a regular basis. So then, if anybody who has seen what I've made, or heard of things that I've been advocating, the likelihood it is a game then that they've probably heard of. So it's a strange type of thing, and I struggle with it because I no longer have a very good gauge of games that are underappreciated, because I appreciate them and I try to put the positive word out. And when I say things about certain games, I get some responses where people also share their love for the game. So then I start questioning, well, maybe they're not underappreciated, or maybe they're not underknown. So it does complicate things. A great example to illustrate it is Yoku's Island Express. Love that game. Love the idea. Love, a pinball simulator meets Metroidvania adventure. It's a super indie idea, and it's super entertaining. I enjoyed the hell out of it. It's challenging. It's a fascinating idea that I'd love to see more of, because it made me happy. I love pinball. Metroidvanias are obviously something that everybody has some positives, hopefully, about that as a genre. It can be very exciting. There's exploration. There's attainment of new abilities, which is always really cool, and seeing how that changes things. So that's all. That's sort of my baseline example of a game where I think it's underappreciated, but I'm not sure, because I've wasted a lot of words about it in a number of different ways since it's come out. So this is with a grain of salt, where I'm not sure if they really are underappreciated or not, and some of this I'll be spitballing because I can think of titles that are older that aren't on my top 100 list, but I figured I'd look through my top 100 list to look for games that stand out as ones that I don't think get the respect that they deserve, and we'll go from there. One of them definitely, Assault Android Cactus Plus. How this isn't immediately on pretty much the top of anybody's list for arcade-style twin-stick shooters would be beyond me. I still go back and play the Daily Drive on a regular basis. It's still so satisfying. It's just fast, intense. It's just, if you think that you like twin stick shooters and you've never heard of or played it, you owe it to yourself to play this game, because it is excellence personified. It is an incredibly good, tight, satisfying twin stick shooter there are tons of different androids to choose from that you'll unlock, that play incredibly differently. You'll definitely you'll find your favorites, versus there's other ones that you just, once you've played with them, you don't want to play with them anymore. It's just like peanut starch and, dang, I can't even remember the name of my favorite android. She's the one with the cannonball kind of attack and the seeker guns. I think she has a more normal name, so my brain doesn't want to come up with her name. But yeah, I love Starch, who actually reminds me a bit of my oldest daughter. Just the personality and the weird statements. She seems like she has autism to me, which amuses me and reminds me of my older daughter. Just very left field kind of things that she says sometimes. Like when you, it's just, yeah. And the other one, like I said, I really like Peanut, who has magma powers and this drill that she'll quickly attack with, which is very, very satisfying when you're good at it. But yeah, that is. I wish more people. I wish that game had gotten the success that some of these other big games get, because I feel that it really deserves it, and it's a shame that it hasn't. Made by Witchbeam, the same people who made Unpacking, which I think actually got more, zeitgeist recognition. Excellent game. I love that game. But it's one of those frustrating things. Like, if it feels like it didn't, that Assault Android Cactus didn't get anywhere near the word of mouth that Unpacking got, and yet, like I said, to me, it's right on the top of the pile for twin stick arcade shooters. Another one that I don't know if it got the recognition, but I feel like it's a more daring and better game than I've seen people praising, is Rainbow Billy: The Curse of the Leviathan. Now I can see why more people aren't necessarily going crazy over it, because of its wholesome. It's extremely wholesome and positive, and unusual. But that's what I love about it. It has sort of turn-based combat, but not the way you normally think, because one of the things that you're able to do is you're trying to usually engage with your enemies who are frustrated or angry, and you're trying to understand them and trying to help, be empathetic, or to find ways to connect with these creatures that start as your enemies. And most of the time, your goal is to really to befriend them and to make them feel positive, and they become your allies. And as you have more allies, you have more access to their unique I wouldn't call them attacks. When you're in combat, there are a bunch of different mini games that end up taking up how these different allies of yours, the different areas that they address. It's a bit complicated. You really should just watch the videos or something to get the idea of it. But in general, something that's extremely positive, that's very family friendly. Now, I think that it gets to be a little wordy in terms of dialogue, and this is me saying wordy. So if I'm feeling like it's a bit on the wordy side, yeah, perhaps it might be, because I did get to the point as I got toward the close of the game, when I'd get into these, there'd be maybe 20-30 dialogue boxes. I would just start skipping, because it was too much. It's like I want to see how this ends. All the different dialogues got to be a bit much. But yeah, just a very different, a very positive, and I think we need more of those types of games out there, where it's not all battles to defeat. There are more positive ways of dealing with people that, a lot of the time, these evil people, sort of what people complain about with movies, the Disney movies, where they've tried to humanize their villains, which I agree with to a point. Sometimes, like, I don't know, like Maleficent, you could have just left her evil, but that's a different discussion. But I think this attempt to see people, angry and mean people, as they probably have their own problems, and there are probably reasons that they are so angry. There's something positive to, every once in a while, going down that path, rather than shooting them or beating the crap out of them. Maybe there's something there that's worth understanding to help them not be so angry. it's a different approach. I appreciate it. Um, Another one that's from last year that I think found some success, but I don't know because like I don't really pay. When you're playing so many games, I don't tend to see much of the rest of what's out there. But I feel like it didn't get the recognition it should have. Is Dodgeball Academia. Mixing dodgeball with a very RPG kind of setup and story. Um, already they had my interest, but it's really the quality of the dodgeball play in particular is just it's incredibly good. And as you have different allies that are part of your squad, everybody has different abilities, so you have to come up with what suits your style of play. You're a group of three, and it's just a lot of fun. It's excellent. The story's weird and pretty funny. But yeah, it's been usually when you see dodgeball games, they're okay, or very arcade style, but nothing with dodgeball has ever played as well as Dodgeball Academia does. It's super satisfying. It's so it's well worth checking out, and I think it's not doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Trying to speed things up a little bit. Another one that's older is Flat Heroes. Because of its simplistic look, I think people, they look at it and they're, what the screenshots and things like that, and it feels boring. But just the tightness of the controls, ultimately it's sort of an action oriented platformer where you're very versatile. You can stick to walls and stuff like that. But really, it's a dodging game more than anything. You'd have to play it almost to understand, or look at the video. It's just a very different feeling game. The controls to it are incredibly tight and satisfying, which they would need to be for what you're doing most of the time. And it's a really unique game that feels great to play. So we'll leave it at that. Let's see, Ape Out. Oh, Ape Out, love Ape Out. Sort of beat 'em uppy in a way, because you do knock a bunch of people out. It's particularly fun to knock them out of windows when you're in the skyscraper. You can grab people as human shields, but it's thoroughly enjoyable and different kind of game. The soundtrack is very adaptive. It's got a really cool jazz sort of soundtrack going, and the tempo of the music and even the style, sort of the hits of the music are all tied to what you're doing. So as you hit somebody, you'll hear cymbal crashes and things like that. It's just a very cool game that ended up having a good story. You don't know it as you go, but it becomes a very satisfying conclusion with more challenges once you finish it. So I don't think it got the recognition it deserved. It certainly should get more than it got. Another one is One Finger Death Punch 2. In principle, a very simple game. There's actually not very much to it in terms of controls, because it's very much button on this side, button on that side for attacking people that are coming at you. And there's a mobile version of it, because it can be that basic that you don't need a lot, but so satisfying, or at least to me. Just waves of enemies that you will have different things that you have to contend with, because different enemy types, some require more than one hit, and it ends up being sort of a sequence of hits, toward, away, toward type of things. And there's in your brain, there ends up being sort of seeing the things coming, and you end up sort of mentally knowing, the series of presses that you're going to have to do in order to contend with, what you're seeing. But its focus is really on precision. If you end up button mashing, you're probably gonna die, or lose. And there's tons of weird power ups, and it's visual style because it's sort of stick figures, so it's kind of ridiculous looking, but at the same time, some of the action they get is so funny and satisfying. Seeing stick figures do flying kicks and all kinds of crazy stuff with different types of weapons. It's just, I don't know. It's for the price it's asked, and the amount of depth that they get out of a very simple concept. I'm a big fan, and I think that it could get more recognition than it does, certainly. Let's see if there's any others that stand out. Carrion is definitely, Metroidvania where you play as a monster. I don't know that it got the recognition it probably should. Let's see. Something on the side of more family friendly. Labyrinth City, Pierre the Maze Detective. Just very unique and very family friendly. And I'm a big fan of things that that you could play with your kids around. I really do appreciate games that go that route. And then let's see. A good one to sort of quasi end on is The Wild at Heart, which is sort of an adventure with Pikmin would be the best description I could come up with for it. And really satisfying, and just a good way of taking the Pikmin concept and wrapping it around a different feel of a game. But yeah, and I don't think I've seen a lot of people sort of singing its praises. In terms of older ones, there are two that are perennially on my list of underappreciated, but they're like right from the beginning of the Switch lifespan. Has Been Heroes, a very satisfying strategy game, but the reason it never took off, that one I know didn't get the recognition it deserved, because most of the reviews were actually really negative. And originally I had the same frustration most people had with the way it played, because I just didn't get what it was trying to do with its strategic style, and the way that you needed to approach combat. But once I was able to wrap my head around what it was trying to do, and certainly after they made a big patch that helped a bit. It helped make it more clear what you were supposed to do, type of thing. But yeah, I actually had made a series of videos. This is before I was doing Nindie Spotlight and stuff. They were trying to sort of explain the strategy behind different boss battles, and trying to help people get why this was a cool game, and why it was worthy of their time. And another one from that same time span that I don't think gets recognized is Tumble Seed. The roly roguelike. It is such a strange game. It's super hard, which certainly explains why people didn't necessarily latch onto it, but just thoroughly unique. I forgot what the name of the old arcade game that they based it on, but it's your seed is rolling on a bar, and your controls are really just to be able to hold up the two ends of the bar, and you're trying to angle it to get them to either avoid going into holes, or in some cases you want it to go into holes, and you acquire different seeds that have different types of abilities that are helpful, certainly, for offense, defense, that kind of thing. And just, it's a thoroughly creative, smart, well-made game. It's very hard. So that's it for games that I think are underappreciated, that dropped under the radar. Hopefully you haven't heard of all of them, and that didn't seem like a waste of time. Then the last question is, lastly, with Tunic coming to Switch at the end of the month, what indie games from PC or other consoles would you like to see come to Switch as well? That one's harder. It used to be easy because I used to have a long laundry list of games that I'd played on PC that hadn't come to Switch yet, and that list was pretty long at one point. But pretty much that entire list, all the games have made it to Switch at this point. So I don't have a standing list like I used to, but I did reflect on some that I'm excited for, that I played at PAX, that haven't come out yet, that definitely, caught my eye. One of them, and I've played this at multiple PAXs, is Depths of Sanity, sort of Metroidvania that is you're in a sub. It's different. I don't know how much of a splash it'll make for people, but I don't know. It had enough going for it that like I said, I've played it at PAX twice, and it's gotten, in the time between playing it, it had improved substantially, and it feels like a game that deserves some recognition and should be good, but we'll see. Another one, Power Chord. We've had a lot of deck builders, roguelike deck building games, but mixing it with, there's almost a Borderlands style art to the groups, and you're playing as a heavy metal band basically, and your combatants are people that are playing different instruments in your band, and so the battles have there's a musical basis to them. It's just, presentation wise and in terms of having a cool thing going, they hit the mark on that. But just some different ideas with how you can build up your band, how you can throw points into specific people and abilities, or you can spread your points out, or you can focus only on one particular player that you're trying to make super powerful. It just seemed like it has a lot of potential to be different and interesting. Sort of getting to my English major base, I really am looking forward to Writer's Block, which would really be like the old game Bookworm from PopGap. Take Bookworm but make it a roguelike somehow, and you have Writer's Block. So a word game that you have to concern yourself with specific letters that are being attacked, or that you're going to have a penalty if you don't use. So it's a challenge and it's hard, but I loved Bookworm back in the day, and taking that base formula and adding roguelike to it instantly caught my attention, because I generally like anything you make roguelike. And when I played it at PAX, it was very satisfying, to my English major vocabulary flexing self. It was fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing that on Switch. One called Below the Stone, which in a way feels like a mix of the Stardew Valley's mining, which unfortunately just wasn't that elaborate, but it was satisfying, and I liked the mining in Stardew. And then taking that kind of thing and mixing it a bit with something like Terraria. It's very exploration oriented. It's underground. You don't know what's going to be, through this wall. I'm going to start digging through this material for this wall, and I'm going to find out what happens, and you end up opening another biome. And you're going to be attacked there, and perhaps perhaps you're going to die. So in that sense, very Terraria-like, that as you're digging in different places, you never know what you might end up uncovering, whether good or bad. But I didn't get a lot of time with it, but I liked what was there. I liked the use of lighting, and it felt like something familiar but different enough that it was, catching my interest. Um, Another one from PAX is Rogue Spirit, which, it's sort of a beat 'em up that beat 'em up in a way, but what you're doing is you start out with your ability is to possess different people or different enemies that you encounter. You're able to possess them, and as you possess them, they all have different weapons and abilities. So you're really sort of jumping around, and to face some enemies, you're going to want different people. So it's like, you end up feeling really strong with this one particular type of warrior or whatever that you've taken over, but maybe you're not going to be able to stick with that person because you have something coming up where they don't do so well against a certain type of combatant. It's one of those things, you see the potential and you're excited about it. It played very well. I am very curious if a whole game can be sustained on that, because that wasn't really clear in the you get like 15 minutes or whatever to check something out. But I like the potential. I like moving from enemy to enemy, acquiring different skills and sort of taking advantage of it for different benefits. Because sometimes there's things in the environment too that you want a specific person to be able to get to them or to interact with them. So yeah, I'm excited about that. Another one that I'm excited to return to is, and I don't want to mangle its name, Dordogni, something like that. But it was very artistic, extremely artistic, and it was a very simple game where your goal was to go out and to take a picture, to capture a certain area, or you'd get sound from a certain place, and there are things that you're going to put into your scrapbook. And it wasn't necessarily clear how all this fit in with each other, because your goals were, go find this sound, go take a picture here. But the artwork to the game was just fabulous, and it just sometimes I like games that like there's an exploration angle to them, and they're laid back, and you can just appreciate what's there. This felt like something in that vein, so I'm interested to see more. And the last one that I have talked about a bit, but I'm excited to see, is Lego Brick Tales. Just finally a Lego game that really feels like it's focused on the experience of using and building Legos to create very specific things for very specific purposes. Where you're not necessarily given the ideal pieces, and though the interface is challenging certainly, and the core experience finally really feels like playing with Legos. I said that if you think about how you assemble things when you're building Legos, you hopefully appreciate how challenging it is to make console controls, or even with PC and with a mouse and keyboard, how challenging it can be to represent your need to come at something from all angles and be able to place one piece with another, especially when you end up realizing after you've already built most of something that you need to put in an extra piece somewhere, trying to navigate to the right angle to see where you need to put it, and then telling this piece, you have to place it. It matters what direction it's facing and all that. Those are complications that you're able to use your the dexterity of your fingers just to do very quickly, but trying to translate it into something that is using console controls and stuff like that, it is challenging, and the controls are in a way cumbersome, but I think the way that they're implemented, you couldn't probably do much better, no matter how much time you spent. So I think that they're doing the best to address a very complicated thing. So yeah, Legos, using them in a more pure, real way, whether it be normally everything's automatically assembled. But then on top of that, like I said before, there's a physics piece to this. So if you build a bridge, it's not just that you aesthetically build something that looks like a bridge. It needs to actually function. So that angle too is very satisfying. So in a way, it mixes multiple genres. Sims where you're building things, like bridge building sims. You don't just build bridges. That's just an example of a structure that has to answer to physics at some point. But mixing that kind of experience with Legos, and like I said, the most ideal sort of Lego thing, in a real Lego thing, where when you have an idea that you have something you want to create when you're a kid, you didn't usually have the ideal pieces for that. So you had to get creative. You had to use, pieces in combinations that you normally wouldn't in order to create that thing that you want, that functionality that you want sometimes, that structure, that appearance. You'd have to really get creative. And I really appreciate something that is trying to recapture that. And we'll see how it turns out. But anyway, that's it for the questions. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll hopefully talk to you again another time. Be sure to submit your questions. Thanks. Bye.